Welcome to the Coastside Land Trust's webinar series on birds of the Central Coast, specific to the Half Moon Bay area. I'm the executive director, and my name is Jo Chamberlain. We are very fortunate to have in our community a internationally renowned ornithologist, Alvaro Jaramillo, and this is the fourth in our series of 6 birding webinars. This one's entitled Beach and Ocean Birds. Alvaro, maybe you can tell us a little about yourself and what we can expect today.
Okay, thanks, Jo, and thanks to the Land Trust for hosting these webinars. It's been fun, and hopefully people are getting to learn and see a few new things that maybe they didn't even know existed around here. But yeah, my name is Alvaro Jaramillo, and I run a tour company, birding tour company, but I'm also an author, biologist, conservationist, and anything to do with wild birds, I'm interested in it. And I'm lucky enough to live here in Half Moon Bay, and I've had this wonderful relationship with the Coastside Land Trust for some time now. But let's get going on this. And so, for a lot of people, the Half Moon Bay, the coastside, it's all about the coast. That's what makes this part of the California special and different than, being inland or up in the mountains, of course. And so now we're going to look at things that, you might not be able to find in other parts of the state or even the country. Related to the coast. Some things more widespread than others. But first of all, I want to say happy 4th of July. And you're probably wondering, why is he showing us turkeys, wild turkeys? But I don't know if any of you know this, but Benjamin Franklin wanted the national bird to be the wild turkey. He said it was a noble bird and it had such historical significance in the history of the United States. And he thought that the turkey was really a much better symbol for the country than the bald eagle. And turkeys are actually pretty cool birds, and I won't get too much into turkeys other to say that they've been introduced to California, and they're really expanding, and before you know it, we'll have turkeys all over the coast, I'm sure. But here is the bald eagle, and bald eagles are becoming more frequent on the coast side, especially when you cross the reservoirs on Highway 92. They're nesting in there, and they're increasing generally in this part of the world, which is great to see. But I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you're watching TV and it's always those commercials for something and a bald eagle flies in. This is the call you hear. But this, you don't hear. The first call is actually the call of a red-tailed hawk. And the actual call of the bald eagle, this one, it kind of sounds a little bit like, if you watch the Muppets, that Guy Beaker, it's not it's not the call that seems to go with such a powerful bird. So you'll find them dubbing the fake call on bald eagles to make them sound more macho, which is interesting. There's a whole psychology there going on, but I just wanted to let you know, if you hear that sheer, that's not a bald eagle, that's a red-tailed hawk. So if you hear that around here, you're actually hearing a red-tailed hawk. Now, here's a little eagle story. When I was in Florida, I was being hosted by a group of birders there, and I remember Bob Wallace, a friend from Florida, took me to a dump, birders, if you get an access to a landfill, a dump, they're great places to go watch birds, gulls, and all sorts of things. Especially in Florida, all sorts of things go to the dump. And not only that, in Florida, the dump is the highest mountain in the county. In almost every county in the lowlands, the dump is the highest point in the county. So we were watching all of these bald eagles, 40, 50 of them, at the dump site, foraging in the garbage. And I thought, I just said to Bob, and we're driving from one site to the other, maybe Franklin was right, and the turkey should have been the national bird. It's certainly much more noble than these eagles feeding on garbage. And just as I said that, a whole group of turkeys flew into the dump and started feeding on the dump. So I just want to say, you're good and bad, and you can have your critiques over birds and national birds, but the bald eagle is actually a pretty good one. Turkey wouldn't have been bad, but probably bald eagle is a good one. And also, happy Canada Day. July 1st was Canada Day, and I'm multinational, so I'm a Canadian, and I just wanted to say happy Canada Day. We don't have the national bird of Canada here, but this is certainly the bird one of the birds that started me birding up in Canada. To me, that sound of the common loon in the summer is just exactly sort of brings me back to the time when I was a kid learning about all this stuff. All right, so beach and ocean, and here in Half Moon Bay, and we'll talk about some land birds, talk about some coastal birds, and then actual true seabirds. So we'll do a little bit of everything today. So here's what it looks like if you've never been to Half Moon Bay and the Wave Crest property. It's a wonderful spot where you have ocean. We have an actual bay, so it's a little bit, sometimes a little less choppy than the outer waters, and mountains on one side, and this coastal prairie right along sort of between the houses and the beach. We have this buffer zone that is a grassland, which is really nice because it adds a different habitat that is not agricultural, but it's flat and grassy. And this is a great place to find the Savannah sparrow. We have really good populations of breeding Savannah sparrows all year round. In fact, you can see Savannah sparrows in that coastal area in the grass, or even agricultural sites, further inland. And Savannah sparrows, I talked about them last time, have, they're real whitish underneath, and then they have this yellow kind of between the bill and the eye, stripy above and stripy below. But just want to show you or make you think about the shape. It's a little sparrow that actually looks kind of short-tailed, so stubby-tailed, and the legs are really pinky, like very bright. Well, at least you notice that they're pinkish. And that's important when you're trying to separate it from the song sparrow. Now, song sparrow is in more shrubby edge habitats. Savannah sparrow is truly in grassland habitat. So keep that in mind. If you see a little sparrow in flat grass where there's no shrubbery anywhere near it, it's probably a Savannah sparrow just on habitat. But both of them are stripy underneath. You can see that the song sparrow has a longer tail and those darker legs versus the real pale legs of the Savannah. And Savannah has, again, that yellow between the eye and the bill. Both will be stripy underneath, and both can have the stripes, the streaks kind of come together in a little spot right at the breast, at the middle of the breast. That's actually very typical of a lot of our streaky sparrows in the New World. And one thing that is you might have never thought of, even if you've been birding for years, you think of the Savannah sparrow as being named for the habitat, maybe a savanna. You think of this grassy area and some trees nearby, but it's not. If you look at the spelling of Savannah, it's got an H at the end, and it's named for Savannah, Georgia, not Savannah, the habitat, which does not have an H at the end. If we're, lucky sometimes in the area, we also have grasshopper sparrows in the grassland. And I put the Savannah and the grasshopper together because they are real grassland birds. And in that coastal prairie, we will see grasshopper sparrows sometimes. Like this year, there are none here. They're a little bit inland. There's some down by San Gregorio, elsewhere. But their distribution changes from year to year depending on the quality of the grass. And sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not. And they're, again, in the grass, like the Savannah. But look at the fact that the grasshopper sparrow here on the right has a real big head and actually a much bigger beak, but no stripiness underneath. It's got warm color, but no streakiness underneath. And I'll just play you a voice first of Savannah and then grasshopper, not so much to differentiate them, but I just want you to hear the quality. These are really high-pitched songs. And some of you may not be able to hear some of the higher pitched notes in these songs. And what's important about this is that these two sparrows aren't all that closely related to each other, but both have these high pitched songs. And it's because of the habitat. In fact, those high-pitched sounds carry really far in open habitats, and especially when you don't have much wind in the morning, they can carry for a long way. And those high-pitched sounds don't do well in forest, where they start bouncing off the trees and degrade. You want lower-pitched sounds in forest, higher-pitched sounds in open country. And birds actually fit to or evolve to a certain song type frequency that not only is attractive to other birds and their species, but also is specific to the habitat type that they use. So keep that in mind. High-pitched sounds for these two. Now, I've been telling people that I'm trying to keep to the birds that are here now and not, getting too overwhelming in my information with birds that are not here right now, but I should mention two that come into these coastal prairie habitats in fall and winter. The Western Meadowlark, which is this yellow-breasted bird with the black V, and they will be in flocks. They fly around, and you often don't see the yellow because they'll show you the more cryptic colored back when they're trying to hide from you. And only when they turn around will you see that bright yellow color. And then the Say's Phoebe, which is similar to the black Phoebe in its shape, but it's bigger and has a slightly different tail wag. The Phoebe is all tail wag, but this guy almost flares the tail as it wags, so a little flare. And that cinnamon underneath in the brownish color, very upright stance compared to some of the other birds we see here. Keep that in mind. So when September rolls around, these two will start joining the scene and will become kind of frequent birds that you see. Wanted to also tell you about a resource as you're learning about this or getting more into it, or you're really into it, and you might want to use this resource called eBird. It's an international database where you can put birds in to the database. You can use an online or phone, mobile option. But I wanted to show you that I'm not going to go through this. If you get into eBird, even if you don't have an account, go to the Explore, and then you can find photographs and sounds in the Explore section. And you can even drill down and look at all the photographs of song sparrows and isolate them to the California ones and so forth. And you can really learn a lot by just looking at their resources without even being a contributor, but you can be a contributor, and it's absolutely free, ebird.org. Right, the beach. This is the beach before a winter storm, and you just want to see that, we have that creek over there on the right. We have a couple of creek mouths. Creek mouths are really important for some birds along the beach. The open beach, different habitat for some other birds. So creek mouths are key to go visit if you're going to be looking for birds on the beach. And one of the ones that is on the beach anywhere, actually much of the year, we have sanderlings, even though they breed in the Arctic. Believe it or not, these birds you'll recognize because of their behavior. So if you've ever seen those little birds that chase the wave in and out, they're called sanderlings. And sanderlings are a kind of sandpiper. And sandpipers, there's a multitude of different types of sandpipers and their relatives, the plovers and the oyster catchers, and all together we call them shorebirds. Sanderlings usually look kind of grayish white, and for a certain time of the year, really around here, late spring, and just when they start coming back very soon in midsummer, late summer, they can be rusty looking, like this one at the bottom here. But for the most part, they look like white, and they go around in flocks and they chase the waves. And the reason why they're chasing the waves is for a few seconds, when those waves retreat, all of this food is available to them. So they have to be really quick, find the food, pick it, and then run away before the next wave comes along. It's sort of, to me, seems like a really stressful lifestyle, maybe the most stressful lifestyle you could ever have, kind of running in and out of the waves to try to get your food. Other shorebirds do it in a different way. They're not running in and out of the waves, but they might be up higher in the sand or in the mud flats. And as I said, there's a real diversity of them. And one of the things you'll see is that they differ in their size and in their bill shape, as well as their overall, shape. So this guy with the curved bill is a kind of curlew, and he's called a whimbrel. The willet has a straight bill, and the willet has very strongly marked white on the wings. They're very common here, and both of these are quite common here. And another one you see on the beach here at the river mouth is the black-bellied plover, down here with a short, almost peg-like bill. So the bills are really important in separating the groups and sometimes even the species apart. So this is whimbrel, willet, black-bellied plover. Now, I'm not going to get into high, level of how to separate all of these shorebirds. That's for an entire different set of workshops. I will be doing one actually for the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory, so keep that in mind about shorebird identification. And whimbrel, if you look at the bill, it really is kind of like a tweezer, and that's what they do. They use that bill to pick stuff off the surface of the sand and the mud. Sometimes they'll drill in a little bit, but not too much. Whimbrels and many of the shorebirds are really fantastic migrants. And this one down here that you see in the photograph has an antenna popping out. It also has a colored leg band with a number that you can read, from a distance, so you can figure out who this bird is. And we know it was banded in Alaska. And this individual was actually tracked by a satellite transmitter. And you see the maps here of these birds from Alaska coming down across the coast of the Pacific. So they went right by Half Moon Bay. And then some of them divide up and go coastal, and others actually go right over water between Mexico and Ecuador nonstop. They just fly nonstop to get to South America and eventually down to Chile. What was really cool about this individual bird is that they were tracking it. The biologists were in touch with people in Chile, and they were able to tell local birders, you have a satellite tagged bird in your local beach, and birders went, saw it, photographed it, and were able to get details on what the bird looked like, if it looked healthy and so forth, back to the USGS biologists within that same day, which is pretty cool. In the shorebird realm, you have, as I said, birds that have bigger bills, shorter bills, different kinds of bills. And two of the most impressive that show up here on the beach as well as the harbor are the long-billed curlew. They're actually, believe it or not, even though it's still just midsummer, some long-billed curlews are migrating south already and showing up. With many shorebirds, the female will lay the eggs, of course, and then she doesn't do much of the parental care. In some shorebirds they do, and some they don't. Often in many, the females actually lay the eggs, and once the male settled on the nest, she leaves and heads down to the wintering areas, leaves the male to take care of the young. And once the young hatch, the young are self-sufficient. They're precocial, so they'll walk around and make do and eat, and eventually, migrate on their own after the adults have gone. So these wonderful migrations that the whimbrel does, you have to also take into account that the first migration the youngsters do, they do on their own without the help of the parents, and it's all in their head somehow, in their genes, they know what to do. So long-billed curlews are coming south. Most likely these are the females that are coming down first, then the males later. And look at that big bill, much longer than the whimbrel. And a whimbrel, if we sort of look back, the whimbrel has these stripes on the head. And here you can see those stripes on the head, and shorter bill. Long-billed curlew has sort of a ring, a pale ring around the eye, but not much striping on the head, and super long bill. And then right at the end of the bill, it almost looks like the bill gets like thicker, and that is a fleshy bit of the bill that is super saturated with essentially sensory cells that, that feel for food. So these birds will dig that bill into the mud or the sand and feel for the food, actually detect when there's food, and then can grab it. And again, sort of a tweezer-like bill. The Godwit, marbled Godwit over here on the right, they don't have a bill that curves down. Their bill's actually straight, and it almost looks like it scoops up a bit. But look at how in plumage, these two birds are really quite similar, kind of brown and speckly and stripy and really kind of wonderful in their plumage as you sort of look in detail, but the real differences are in their beaks. Now, I talked about males and females. One of the things that in these big-billed shorebirds, the curlews or the godwits, is that the males and females have totally different structures, so their shapes. So if you see this bird over here on this side, it's got sort of a short bill compared to the one on the right here. And look at the legs are also short. You don't see much of the leg going up towards the body here. There's a long, long leg. Females in the godwits and the curlews are much longer built, longer legged than the males. And the reason is that they're dividing the habitat up by being different in the depth of water or the type of mud they can actually feed in. So these shorebirds, it's a really amazing situation of matching bill type to how they feed, and then even matching bill lengths within species to where in the environment they feed. So a lot of things you can be looking for, apart from just telling which is which, and here's a marble godwit, you can be looking at what they're doing, and eventually you could even be telling which ones are males and females when you get really good at it. Our snowy plovers nest on the beach. They really, really require open, sandy or salt, flat kind of habitats to nest, very specific habitats. And that's one of the reasons the snowy plover, we take so much care to make sure that they nest safely here on our beaches. This year they tried to nest here, but they didn't pull off a nest, yet down further south in the county they were successful. So snowy plover is a little short-billed, very sand-colored bird. And what I love about them is that somehow they find these little scoops in the sand that are just perfectly shaped for them, and they'll just sit down into them so that their shadow completely disappears. And when they do that, you almost can't find them on the beach until they start walking around. Here's one from a few years ago that Leslie Flint photographed with two babies sticking out underneath. You see those extra legs? Those are the babies seeking shelter under one of the parents. So every few years we have a successful nest here, but in the winter, fall, winter, we always have a flock of them around on the beach, basically, you know, south of the creek mouth, Pilarcitos creek mouth, somewhere in there. They move around a bit, but they're always with us. Okay, gulls. Here's a couple of, was it last week? I talked to you about pet peeves with birders. One of the pet peeves they have is when people say, I saw a seagull. And because not all gulls are in the sea, and you know, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of gulls. I actually don't really mind when people say seagull. I know what they mean. But if you're really thinking of the archetype gull that we see here, Monterey, all sorts of places on the coast, it's called the Western gull. That's the actual species name for the Western gull. It's kind of a darker backed gull, white on the head, body, tail, and they always have this banana yellow beak. Really, really, really bright banana yellow, almost orange with a little red spot on it. And their biggest colony on Earth is only, you know, less than 30 miles away from here on the Farallon Islands. And there's also a colony in the harbor and various other places along Devil's Slide. They're sort of our locally nesting gull. So the Farallon Islands are a very important place for this gull. And in fact, if you look worldwide, even though it's our common gull here, it really is a gull that doesn't have much of a large range compared to many of the other gull species. It's so specific really to Central California and Baja. And as soon as you get up to Oregon, Washington, they're still there, but they sort of fade out once you get into Washington. And they fade out when they meet another gull up there, and they actually interbreed with them, but that's a whole different story I don't want to get into. Farallon Island's probably famous not only for the birds, but the sharks that show up every so often, and that's a great white shark. They're eating a mammal, and this is the only time I ever got to see this kind of thing happen, and it's terrifying and exciting all at the same time. One of those things that when you see it, you just cannot believe what you just saw. It was a 16-foot long female shark, so it was pretty wild. At the Farallons, you also have nearly 300,000 common murres nesting. And common murres are the birds that sometimes when they're sick, they show up on the beach. And I think a lot of locals have seen them and they look kind of like a penguin. We might put, maybe we'll put resources of what to do when you see a sick murre. If a murre is on the beach, standing around on the sand, it is not doing well. It's not, that's not what they do. So you can be assured that bird is having problems. Common murres are, will be eating fish all along the coast here, and they can be sometimes well offshore and sometimes right up close to the beach. When they're in summer, you'll see that they have this dark head and dark back, sort of pale underparts. And then as they get into winter plumage, they start getting a white face with a dark teardrop right behind the eye like that. And in this situation, you see this one on the left here looks smaller and he looks a little crisper looking in its plumage. And then this one is a little bit bigger. Common murres have a unique breeding strategy in that, so they're in these islands, right? So the FARALLONs, all these slopes will be covered by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of common murres nesting on there. And they're right on the cliffs. In fact, their eggs are shaped like a real sort of triangle so that when they roll in a tight circle so they don't fall off the cliff. And there are gulls. I just mentioned these western gulls by the, also tens of thousands, and they're predators of the eggs and chicks. So when the chicks hatch and they're big enough to sort of, they're sturdy enough, and, I forget how many days old they are, they actually just go and jump into the ocean. And they jump into the ocean before they can fly, when they're still just sort of they're not just a fluffy chick anymore, they've got some feathering. And then they listen for the call of their dad. Their father takes care of them, and they will find the dad, and then they will swim away from the island as fast as they can, because the island at that point is more dangerous to them because of the gulls than the ocean. So they swim away with these birds, these little guys, and starting in July, so really soon, we'll start seeing little chicks following the adults right here in Half Moon Bay, and most of those will have swam over 30 miles from the Farallon Islands. So if you go out on boating and you see these little birds following a big bird, those are dad and chick common murres. And Farallons, you don't see this bird from shore. Somebody asked me about this recently, where can I see a puffin from shore? Unfortunately, you have to go on a boat, go to the Farallons to see tufted puffin. But they are pretty cool, and they're related to the murres and to the Murrelet that I'll show you in a little bit. So our seagulls, the gulls on the beach, and some of you who know me well know that I could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours on gulls. But there's this thing that happens that a lot of birders love gulls or they hate them because they're complex. They're complicated to separate and so forth. And it just happens that Half Moon Bay is a really amazing place for gull diversity. I'll talk about this in a sec. But right now, if you just look at the adult gulls on the beach, on the flock, in the harbor, there's only 3 that are really sort of the more common ones. The western gull, which I just showed you, which has the darkish back and the real banana yellow beak, almost orange, with pinky legs, and they're fat. They're like a pudgy, big-bodied, short-winged gull. Then there's the California gull. They nest from actually mainly in the bay, San Francisco Bay, all the way to Mono Lake and further inland. They're more of an inland gull that comes out to hang out on the coast sometimes. They're smaller, they're longer. You see how this bird actually looks longer? And their bills, not as yellow, not orangey, and they're thinner, and their legs are green. So you can just look at the legs, or just look at the fact that one is paler on the back, the other one, western, is darker. Then the really easy one with a red beak, and right now the adults still have a lot of white on the head. Their entire body is dark. It's called Heermann's gull. So right now there's only 3 types. And so it's a good time, if you just look at the adults, to learn gulls a little bit and look at shapes and so forth. What drives some people nuts and what excites other bird people is the complexity. And that's because they change as they get older. So this real brown western gull, that's a youngster, a 1-year-old, and they get more grayish over here on the top. as they get to be 2 years old, and then they kind of look like the adults by the time they're 3 years old, and they've got some dark on the tail. But it's basically that brown thing goes to a gray back thing with a brown wing to a gray thing that has some black remaining on it, and that's 1, 2, 3 years old. And what's cool here is that because the FARALLONs are nearby and biologists do studies on them, we have plenty of them that have these colored rings on the legs. So if you actually spot them with any colored ring, you know that that was a bird that hatched on the FARALLON Islands. So it's one of the local birds, and you can actually eventually decipher, if you know the code, how old that bird is. So ages in gulls is complicated to some people, but in fact it can be much more simple if you just look at it in sort of a holistic way, and also start by looking at the adults. Once you know the adults, later start learning the young. But I know it's hard, and it definitely is much harder in the winter here than right now. So it's a good time to look at gulls in our neck of the woods. If you see a gull-like bird that dives into the water to get fish, and sometimes you'll see them flying back inland with a little wiggly fish in their red beaks. Those are Caspian terns. They have a lot of black on the underwing, and they have a very long, pointy wing. I find it interesting that the Caspian terns come to fish here, and they fly all the way back to the bay to their nesting colonies to give that fish to the young. So they do these long trips, many miles to the coast, fish, and go back with the fish to the nesting colony. And they take the 92 corridor. So if you see birds, white birds going along when you're driving on 92, those are mostly California gulls and Caspian terns. The Caspian terns keep the fish wriggling in the bill as they go back towards the bay. And this time of year, we have an entry of birds that come in from the south that were breeding down south in Baja in Southern California. And there's 3 of them: brown pelican, the Heermann's gull that I mentioned before, and the elegant tern. The elegant terns like the Caspian, but they're thinner, skinnier, longer, shaggier crests and thinner bills that droop. So the Caspian, can't see it quite well there, has a brighter bill with thicker bill. It's a much bigger bird than these elegant terns. But the elegant terns don't go inland like the Caspians. They tend to be at the harbor and fishing in the bay. All these birds move up north after they breed before they head south again. And the reason is that this time of year here is really productive on the ocean. So they breed at a time that's productive further south, and they follow the productivity, the fish and all the zooplankton and all stuff that's going on in the ocean as the season progresses into the summer. And they'll be here with us into the fall before they head south. And now, having talked about gulls and so forth, and I mentioned this before, this is a really amazing part of the world to be watching birds. And one of the things that's amazing about what happens here is not only the diversity. So you could see 300 species of birds in the county if you try hard over a few years. That's a lot. There's sort of, it's a large proportion of the birds you can see in all of North America, just around here. But we also have been blessed with all these rare birds, unusual birds, sort of historical markers in the birding world. Just like, people who follow sports, can rhyme off details on when a certain, baseball player has reached a milestone, or a hockey player has reached a milestone or done something unique. With us, it's rare birds that show up that shouldn't be here. And Half Moon Bay has had quite a few of them. This bird up here, the kilt gulls from South America, the first in California was seen here. Down here, this other gull is called the slaty-back gull. It's from Japan, Russia. And we are now the place that has more records of this Japanese bird outside of Alaska, anywhere in North America. This albatross, the Salvin's albatross, is from the Southern Hemisphere, from New Zealand. And the first one in all of North America showed up just, on a boat trip from Half Moon Bay. We're sort of becoming famous, and gulls have become our specialty. If some of you who may have not even been into birds a few years ago might have heard about the Ross's gull that showed up near the harbor. And it's a bird from the Arctic. It's a beautiful little gull with pink on the underside. Unfortunately, got eaten by a peregrine before everybody got to see it. It was here for a few days. And then it was so unexpected, this Arctic gull showing up in Half Moon Bay, that people were coming from all over, and it caused traffic. You know, people were parking next to the highway and so forth to see this gull. Some of you probably remember this. So we've become famous for these rare birds, and definitely the ocean side, the coastal ocean side of our landscape is what tends to attract these oddities. So this is Pilarcitos creek mouth along the beach, and you can see we have the freshwater. We have all those gulls in there. Sometimes shorebirds will show up. Peregrine falcons might show up in there. It's a great place. It's the mixing of the freshwater with the salt that's important. A lot of birds that are like the gulls actually like to bathe in the freshwater rather than bathing in salt water. That's why they accumulate where there's a creek mouth. And you might see some ducks, especially in summer right now. Mallards are the birds that are in the creek mouth. The male has that bright green head with the yellow beak, and the female is much more stripy. And although these, you know, the female and the male look so different, just look at the fact that their shapes are actually very similar. Shape is really, if you can have a bird, and I think we talked about the, you know, house finch, on this case of the mallard, because it just looks like the mallard shape and size. So keep that in mind. And I'll go into a few more ducks next time. And just mention that surf scoter is one that's around with us most of the year. They breed in forests way up in the north, just below the Arctic, but they winter here, and a bunch of them will stay all year round. In summer, usually one-year-old birds here on the coast and in the harbor. And if you see them up close, they're really outstanding. They're almost like a puffin in their color, with all that bill color on the male, so surf scoter, and the female is brown and has these spots on the side of the face, kind of in a dark cap and very long bill. Surf scoters are in the surf. They actually like to be in that surf habitat. So if you're a surfer, you might even see these black birds in a little flock. They're called surf scoters. Never in freshwater, basically always saltwater around here anyway. The creek mouth, the egrets, herons, remember that great blue heron's dark and the egrets are white, but there's two kinds of egrets here. The big one, the great egret, has a bright yellow beak and then black legs, and the smaller one, and the bodies are all white, have black beaks with a little yellow at the base of the beak around the eye, and then yellow slippers on the snowy egret. So snowy egret smaller, yellow feet, great egret bigger, yellow beak. I'll just mention that you see the fluffy feathers out the back here, and snowy egret also has some fluffy feathers. Those feathers are actually called egrets in French. That's where the egret gets the name from, the feathers. And those feathers have a special name because back in the day, they were used for making hats. And bird feathers and even small birds being used in hats was very, very common in the 1800s. And in Europe primarily. And it's the reason we started, the conservation movement started, the bird conservation movement started because of feathers and hats, and bird feathers being used in the hats, because these weren't feathers that were plucked from the bird and the bird was let go. These were sometimes people going into full colonies of egrets, killing all of them, extracting the feathers, and then to go sell them for hats. So that's why the Audubon Society has an egret as its logo. And even in England, you know, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds also started from the hat trade in terms of preserving birds. So think about that when you see some egrets and you think, wow, they're really common. It might have not gone that way if people hadn't changed their behavior some time ago. So there's always good stories in conservation. This one is a bird that's in conservation need, marbled murrelet. He's like a little tiny version of the common murre, and they're almost always in pairs. We have them here in offshore, you know, they're very hard to see, and sometimes you need a telescope to see them, but these guys actually fly inland above El Granada, go to the backside of the hill and nest in really big old growth conifer trees usually. They actually make their nest in a tree. So they're a seabird that goes inland to nest in a tree. And for many, many years, nobody knew where they nested. And when we realized that they need these big trees to nest, it became a little bit clearer why they're so uncommon, rare, and sometimes declining in some parts of North America. So marble murrelets. And if you're looking on the coast here, and you sometimes, I showed you a shark earlier, you sometimes will see dolphins, right? Or fins of something right off the beach. And I wanted to show you the two kinds that we see here, the bottlenose dolphin and the harbor porpoise. Because, you know, I've always seen confusion when I see a dolphin and somebody says, oh no, that's a shark. No, and I'll say, no, it's a bottlenose dolphin. Well, how do you know it's not a porpoise? Well, one thing is, think about the movement. You know, the dolphins sort of move and you'll see these fins coming up and down, and you see the back of the animal. There's almost a curvature to the back as it sort of fluidly goes in and out or even rides the wave. Sharks are stiffer, and you will see a fin, and most of the time anybody sees a shark here. Often it's a salmon shark. Offshore, they're blue shark. Great white sharks are here, of course, but they're, you know, don't assume that if you see a shark, it's a gray white. Salmon sharks are actually can be quite common here too, and they're big. The sharks, you know, have this movement that is more just sort of straight and stiff. You don't get the up and down. So if you're getting the up and down and so forth, dolphin or a porpoise. Now the bottlenose dolphin has a longer fin, almost swept back a bit, and you know, real sort of high triangle, and it almost looks like the classic, if you drew a cartoon shark fin, you'd actually be drawing a bottlenose dolphin fin. So keep that in mind, and that you might be seeing dolphins out there. And then the harbor porpoise is smaller, and actually they're really shy, hard to see. They can be quite common when the water's flat. You'll see these little dark things, and it's just a quick movement. You'll see this little dark thing come up. Those are harbor porpoise. They're not very obvious. If the dolphin porpoise is obvious, almost surely going to be a bottlenose dolphin. If it's not obvious, could be the porpoise. And the porpoise has a low fin, like a low triangle. So, you know, figure them out. And if you take photos of them, there are some people who are starting to put together a catalog of dolphin fins to identify the individuals. It's kind of interesting what's going on with that. I'll also mention something about the forage fish, which they don't necessarily have to be fish. You know, we have anchovies and squid and krill, and all of these creatures that can be here in masses follow the plankton. And this picture, this weird picture where you see all this red stuff that comes up and then goes down, the top is the surface, and down here is the bottom of the ocean. This is what happens when, in a day cycle, you have all of the creatures that are out down at the bottom, all the plankton and so forth in the day, comes up in a mass migration to the top for the night, and then they go down again in the day. That diurnal migration of all the little critters in the ocean and the squid following them and everything else following them is the largest migration on Earth, and it happens every day. Just masses, tons, millions and millions and millions and millions and tons of life going up and down on the ocean every day. And that's why you'll see the squid boats going out at night and so forth, and all this stuff that goes on at night. Now, watch this. This is what happens when you can get a lot of forage fish in one area. Oh, this bird is hugely alive. This is taking just a couple of years ago. There were hundreds of thousands of fish in water. There are miles and miles. Non-breeding species here, and they really rely on high densities of squid or anchovy to be around. This is what they look like on you know, up close. They're dark, And there was one instance way back in Santa Cruz, I think it was in the 40s, when these birds were eating food that had toxins from a red tide, and the birds became disoriented in the evening during fog, and they all came into Santa Cruz and started hitting windows and doing all this crazy stuff, and all these birds were everywhere. And that's where the entire idea of Hitchcock's The Birds comes from kind of confused sooty shearwaters. So you can imagine what that would have been like. And they make their entire ocean their home. They move from, in this case, birds that were, tracked from New Zealand, make these figure eights all around the ocean on these massive migrations that are 40,000 miles a year. California is one of their main stopping areas. And now it's the second longest migration on Earth. The longest migration on Earth is the Arctic tern, which is another one of the ocean birds that goes by here every year. It's a little gray bird with a red beak. And they're a bird that breeds where the polar bears are, and then winters, or in the southern hemisphere, summer actually, where the penguins are. So it goes from polar bear to penguin in these massively long migrations, where if you take into account the round trip lengths of 44,000 miles, and the fact that some of these birds can live 30 years, these terns, they're in their life, they're going back and forth to the moon 3 times. And to them, it's nothing. They just do this every year. The reason why all these birds are here and is the food, the plankton, and the forage fish. And this is due to this situation called upwelling. And upwelling is when basically you have, mainly in the spring, the winds move the water out of the way, and new water has to come in from the bottom. And the bottom water is cold and rich in nutrients, hits the surface of the ocean, the light, and then there's suddenly a food smorgasbord for everything else that lives here. And one of the things we do is go offshore. This is the new Captain Pete. We also go out on the Hoolie Cat and go and see these creatures that you really have to go far away to see, like from shore, like the black-footed albatross, that in winter they're nesting in Hawaii and actually come to eat here off of Half Moon Bay before they go back to Hawaii to feed their young. It's really amazing. And you think that trip that the Caspian terns do is big, but these guys do a couple weeks, 10-day, 12-day trips to feed their young. And this year, there's some that are only a few miles from shore. They're actually come quite close to shore. And when you go out there too, we have now an abundance of whales. This is a blue whale where the flukes almost look like an airplane wing, and humpback whales, which sometimes you see right from shore. And, we've had traffic issues because everybody's stopping to see humpback whales lunch feeding. Hopefully they'll happen again this year. That was a couple of years ago that we have all the humpback whales around. And lunch feeding is where they all come up their heads, to get at the food like you're seeing here. And then the flukes of humpback whales are really distinctive in their patterns. And we're starting over the last few years to take pictures of them, and we give them to a group called Happy Whale. Happy Whale has the computer programs that match whale tails all over the world. So some of the Half Moon Bay whales have gone as far south as Nicaragua, but most of them are going to Nayarit in Mexico. That's where most of our humpback whales go. And then some of them are hanging out. They're starting to hang out, and that's a whole new thing. All right. Well, I hope it was not too much of a whirlwind tour of gulls, shorebirds, a little bit on alcids, sort of like the puffin and so forth, as well as some of our grassland birds here on the coast. And next time we're going to talk about the harbor, a few other things that you can see in the harbor, a few more ducks, some other shorebirds, review of some of them again, and what makes the harbor special, because it is one of the best spots to go watch birds in our area is the harbor. Let me see, my windows have been not on here, so I'm going to have to find where the Q&A window is to see what questions we have. Oop, and then we'll move it over here. All right, questions, everybody. Let me start. Okay. So I should mention too that our first FARALLON trips, the July 18th ones, sold out. So we have the other ones that are coming up. There's still space in those in case you want to try and go and see a puffin in Wales. The bill color of Savannah sparrow pinker than in the field? Yeah, sometimes actually it's a pretty good character. They have a smaller bill than the song sparrow, and their bill is a little bit more orangey or pink. Here's a good question. Sanderlings following the waves, have I ever seen one get clobbered by a wave? I've never seen one get clobbered by a wave. It's just one of those things. I've actually seen birds hit each other when they're flying by mistake in a flock, but I've never seen a sanderling get this wrong. And it's amazing because sometimes it's a flock and they're all looking for food. You know, it's each sanderling for themselves for a second, and then they all retreat, and you'd think that one of them would get in the way of the other ones, but no. The question about the band on the whimbrel, is it really high up on the leg? Remember that whimbrel I showed with the antenna? Sometimes on shorebirds, birds that have really long legs, most birds are banded down and the bottom, which, you know, it's not the shin, it's actually the ankle, but we won't get into that. And long-legged birds, you can band them up above the bend. And that's done because, especially in shorebirds, if they're in salt water, bands can get really, really messy. Things can happen to them and so forth. And if you put them higher up on the leg, there's less salt that's going to get on them. That's one of the reasons. Also, it can be easier to read. And my sense is that actually it might be more comfortable for the birds to have them there than down at the bottom. Then, yeah, the question about, do all of these sand-feeding shorebirds have specialized tips on the end of their bills? Yeah, the real extreme case is that long-billed curlew, but their bills tend to be fleshy. They're not hard, you know, they're not like a nail. It's like a fleshy, almost leathery bit on the tip of the bill. And they do have just, you know, a lot of neuron tips there in those bill tips to figure out what's going on. So they're almost, you know, seeing with their bills when they're poking around, and very quickly, I might add, like they will poke very quickly and find food with those bills. A question, a squawk. There's a bird that squawks in the middle of the night for about a month this time of year. They're in El Granado right now. Oh, maybe it's black-crowned night herons, because squawk is what they do. They're kind of a loud, kind of, you know, whack, whack, whack. Black-crowned night heron could be what they are. They're not owls, but they're a heron that actually does most of its foraging at night, and they hang out in the day in the harbor. They kind of hide in the trees. In fact, if you park your car in the harbor, make sure there's no big white splotch on the ground, because that means there's a heron above, and you're going to get that white splotch right on your car. Tips from the pros, from your local ornithologist: don't park over white splotches in the harbor. So somebody asked about piping plovers and how they're similar, different from the snowy plovers. Piping plovers are not found in California. They're in the east. So they will be on the Atlantic coast, Gulf Coast, as well as the Great Lakes. And they are very similar to snowy plovers. They're a little fatter and they have more color on the beak, but they like those same kind of habitats of sand. And we love beaches, and that's one of the reasons why snowy plover and piping plover have had a lot of attention to them in terms of conservation because of their beach habitats. It's just one of those things. Somebody asked, good food year for whales and seabirds? Yeah, it is. Actually, this year, there's a lot of anchovy, there's a lot of krill, there's a lot of food, there are a lot of whales offshore. When I was out last Friday, we were seeing, you know, maybe 40 or so humpback whales around sort of where people were salmon fishing. It just seems to be a really good food year for the birds. And the pelicans that come in at this time of year that I mentioned, if you're really keen on looking at the young pelicans, the brown ones, if they look really even and crisp and every feather sort of is new and kind of all lines up, those are young pelicans of the year. The older ones, brown pelicans, start looking more splotchy if they're 2 or 3 year old immatures. Pelicans take multiple years to mature. So there's a lot of those juveniles, those young of the year this year. So it seems like pelicans had a great breeding season, and they're coming in from further south. So it seems like all of California might have had a great season this year, ocean, speaking about the ocean anyway. Other nesting areas closer to Monterey Bay for the Murre babies. Yeah, well, the Devil's Slide has some, so that's a little, maybe not that much closer. I think there are some Murres nesting off, not too many, off of Big Sur somewhere, but I think there are some off of Big Sur, but it would not be unusual for a FARALLON baby to swim all the way to Monterey Bay if you give it enough time with its dad. They just motor all day, all night, and actually can make good speed while they're foraging. It's vital for that parent to get that bird to food and then bring food to it while it's young. So they will move good distances just to try to get food. So why don't the common Murres fly rather than swim from the FARALLONs? Yeah, I should have explained this a little bit better. For the young to go from egg to chick to flying bird takes a long time. So if it has to hang out all that time on the FARALLONs with all those predators around, because they don't nest in a hole right there, right out in the open, it just increases the chance that you're going to get, predated. So they will spend enough time to get the right kind of feathering on the nest and the right kind of size, and then they drop into the water, and it's not enough time for those wings to have come in. So that's why they swim out rather than fly out. They just want to get out of there early, and they can't do that if they wait for the wings and everything to appear. Somebody said about the shorebird training with San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory, which is in the South Bay. We will put a link to that. It may not be out and about yet, but just sfbbo.org, and it's going to be 2 different workshop series. One is sort of general shorebirds and identification. The other one will be more detailed, sort of advanced shorebird techniques, and they'll be consecutive, so you can take both. Why do gulls change color with age? So there's a good question. And I only have a couple of minutes, and I said I could talk about gulls for a lifetime. If you're a gull and you're at a nesting colony, you're a female gull or a male gull, and you're trying to find a mate, you don't want to mate with a bird that has no experience, because you're a long-lived species. You might live 30 years or so, and you want to make these nestings count. And the immature birds maintain immature plumage basically to communicate that they're not experienced yet. So by the time you look like an adult and you're at a colony, you've been around for 3 years. So that's something. And that alone, there's sort of a selection for that delay in plumage maturation to match your experience, and let everybody else know in the gull world that you're old enough to mate. Now, once you become 10, 15, you can't tell beyond that what age you are, but I think that's what happens. They're long-lived, so they have time for maturation to happen. They're not a bird that only lives 4 years, so you wouldn't want to have 3 years of maturity and then have just 1 year to breed in. They're long-lived, so all this can happen in these birds. And in fact, the smaller the gull species is, the quicker they mature and the shorter lives they live. So big gulls live longer than small gulls. Devil's Slide Murre colony, it's been very successful, and there's why there hasn't been preying on eggs. In fact, there probably is a certain amount of preying on eggs there. I don't know the details, but Murres nest very closed in a pack. There's always adult Murres around to defend not only their nest, but the nests around them. That's part of their colony behavior, to be packed in. And that allows them enough time to lay the eggs and then hatch and so forth. And then again, it's not much time between that and when they plop into the water. So there are gulls around, and there's cormorants in there too that nest with the Murres that give them a buffer or two. So if the colony is big enough and packed in enough, they help each other maintain the gulls away. So that's all I would say now. All right.
All right. Hey.
I can't see you, so.
Oh, okay. I don't want to interrupt you. You always have so much to add, and I hate jumping in here and being the.
I could go on all day, but people have things to do with their lives.
And I know people are sitting on the other end going, "Oh, gee, here comes the wrap." I feel like the lunch person who's closing it down. Thank you again for everything today. And those of you who are waiting to have your questions answered, I know there just recently a whole bunch of questions were added to the queue because there's so much to ask with what you're sharing. We will be sending a follow-up email. So just if you are registered for this, you are here, you will be receiving a follow-up email, just a minute, please, in about, in the next couple of days. And Alvaro's been incredible about sharing answers to those questions. So just wait for that. It'll also have a video, a recording of the video of this presentation. So you can go back and look over it. But lots of good questions still to be answered, and Alvaro has been incredible in answering those. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know we're actually learning. I feel like we are learning so much in these presentations, and also in reading the responses to these questions. We are just learning so much. So we are so grateful to be part of this in that way too. If you are wanted to check out the rest of the series, hop on coastsidelandtrust.org. As Alvaro mentioned, he's going to be doing a presentation on birds of the harbor next week. And to those of you who have donated already, we will thank you so much. There's so much incredible, important work that's being done by the, just a minute, please. Sorry, there's a lot of important work that's being done, conservation and preservation with the Coastside Land Trust, and so for those of you who have donated, thank you. And if you haven't yet, this is a great opportunity and a good time to be reminded to do that. I know it's reminding to me as well. Yeah, so thank you all again for being here. Hope to see a lot of you. Just am incredibly impressed at the number of you who are here on 4th of July and still committed to learning. And it's just this is an important time for us all to be learning, committing to learning new things. And some of you already knew so much about birds, but for those of us who are learning from the very ground, I think Alvaro is incredible at being able to reach us at both levels. So we thank you so much, Alvaro. And thank you all for being here. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.